Okay, so Lynne's a professorial research fellow within the Health Collaborative Research Network at Central Queensland University. She's a population health gerontologist who's made significant contributions to the quality use of medicines, continence health promotion and prevention programs for musculoskeletal conditions. So Lynne's done everything, but more importantly for us today, Lynne's the editor-in-chief of the Australasian Journal on Ageing, and she's here to share the inside secrets, or all the stuff we don't know about getting publications up, the tips, but also getting involved in journal reviewing and so on. So Lynne will be talking today about scholarly writing, and as I say, sharing some simple tips that journal editors can provide about improving the quality of our manuscripts and so on. So please, as I say, if there are burning questions, ask them, but otherwise write them down, keep track of them, and then we'll have a discussion at the end of the session. So let's everybody welcome Lynne. Thank you, Lynne.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you for the invitation to present this. A couple of... I have to thank my collaborators, my associate editors at the Australasian Journal on Ageing. I've actually borrowed a few of their slides from when they do a regular workshop for AAG and for ERA, but I'll put my own words around them. I haven't got their words, but I have got some of their slides. Can you hear me fine? Yeah. And can people see the slides? Because that's always helpful. Okay, what I'm going to talk about today is why publish, something called getting started, some writing tools and tips, editor to know like you, and most important, tips and tricks. Now, Matthew said that I'm going to talk about how, I'm not going to tell you how to write really, but I'm just going to give you a couple of those tips that will oil the wheels and I think will make it a little bit easier to get certainly that peer review and perhaps that acceptance at the end. I'm not going to go that much into reviewing, but very much that front end of how you present your manuscript and how you make that wanted by editors. So, gone backwards there, great. Excuse me while I sort this out. Okay, cool. No, I actually think I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but I thought I should just touch on why you would publish. Because I know sometimes people lose touch with why you would actually publish a paper. And there's a few good reasons. I mean, the obvious is it builds your career. It allows you to get feedback from your peers, which is always useful for developing new ideas. It lets you connect with other researchers, because other researchers will read your work and then want to talk to you next conference you're at, or even email you and say hello. And it has a really important role in knowledge translation. And there's an ethical imperative, I guess, when you do research to make sure you do get it out there so that other people who know about your research. And also, very importantly, it's actually nice and really cool to get published. As this quote says, it's actually really nice to see your name in print, particularly the first time. After about the 5th time, you just think, so when do I get to 20? Okay, so as I said, I'm not going to talk to you about how to write. And I suppose the reason for that is that there's lots and lots of resources out there. If you want to know how to write, a good place to start is with a model or with a guideline. So I'm not a big one for reinventing the wheel. So I actually go and have a look at what other people have done. So there are uniform requirements from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors that tell you what the manuscript should contain. I actually encourage you to go and have a look at that. I've got the website up there for you. There's also instructions for actual journals that you can get via the Central Medical College of Ohio website. There's lots of books out there. I've given you a couple of examples there. But that was actually quite good, that scientific writing, easy when you know how. So there's a lot of data, of information out there about how to write a paper. So it's not going to be my focus, even though I am going to touch on that a little bit. As I said, there's lots of best practice guidelines, and a lot of people may not know about these, but whatever sort of paper you're writing, there's usually actually a guideline out there that tells you how you should be running the project, but also how you write it up. So you've got the consort guidelines for RCTs and cluster RCTs. I don't know whether other people have actually ever noticed when they go to submit a paper, it will say we encourage the use of the consort guidelines or the STARD guidelines or the PRISMA guidelines. And whenever I tell people about this, they go, oh really, there's guidelines out there for this. And so really, it's actually quite, when you use them, it's quite a difficult thing to do. They are quite prescriptive, but they really make it that your paper, when it gets to the journal editor, it looks good, it reads well, you can say you've used the guidelines, and it actually crosses a few ticks and gets you through a few hoops before without much work really. So also, if you're doing qualitative projects, always consider the appropriate theoretical framework, and don't believe, when you're doing qualitative work, do not believe that there's no one else out there who understands qualitative work, because we will want to know what your theoretical framework is. We will want very clear explanations of all that methodology as well. Another issue, so before you get started, this is before you put pen to paper. Do not put pen to paper without first talking about authorship. And I think, again, this is something that when people are writing papers, sometimes they think, I just have to sit down and write it. And they don't prepare, they don't look at the guidelines, they don't know how they should write it properly, they don't look at past papers from whichever journal they're choosing. So there's, again, that International Committee of Medical Journal Editors have developed the Vancouver Protocol, which tells you very specifically what you need to do to actually obtain authorship. And it's not that simple. You need to actually have a fair bit of input before you can be called an author. So they're very solid and they're very easily understood, those rules. And one thing is there should be no gift authorships, and I know that's a continuing issue. That's been for the last 30 years I've been worrying about that one. Can I say that it's really good to have a formal policy of who will be on papers arising from any project that you're working on. I actually tend to say it saves tears at bedtime, because if you haven't actually set up front who will be involved, the people who aren't involved start to get a bit interesting when papers come out. So you need to actually have your ducks set up in a row before you even put pen to paper. You need to know who those are going to be. Okay, so a couple of those writing tools and tips that I promised. These are the sorts of things I'm actually going to talk to you about, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information on these. So, important thing is write for a specific audience and journal. So start with a 20-word main message, use a working abstract, be coherent and logical, and get good feedback before submission. None of those should be news to anybody who's writing papers. So I'm going to start with choosing a journal, which might sound a bit odd coming from the EIC of the Australasian Journal on Ageing, but I'm not here to tell you just to submit to our journal, because can I say one of the reasons you have to be careful about choosing a journal, and one of the reasons this talk is so important, is that recently and ongoingly, the number of papers being submitted worldwide is just increasing exponentially. Personally, I actually had to cope with a 30% increase in submissions last year. So if you've got a really good paper to submit to me, I really want to see it, but I'm not actually hawking for submissions currently. So how would you choose a journal? And I suppose the first question is, when do you choose a journal? And I have to say now, before you write. So you've got you know what your topic is, you've done the analysis of whatever you need to do. You know you're going to write a paper, you've got your authors. Which journal are you going to write to? You need to actually know which journal, because it dictates what, not only how many words you're allowed, but also your format. It dictates what sort of audience you're writing to. So choosing a journal, you might actually have a look at the impact factor. I always say be aspirational. Always try for a higher impact factor than the last journal that you were actually read for, where it's possible. Initial acceptance. So is this journal actually going to accept your paper? And some ways you might think about that is, will you cite this journal? If you're not going to cite the journal, it mightn't be appropriate. So check the reference to see if it's, I usually check the references to decide, so I'm going to quote yes, like these journals, maybe that journal is the one I should be going to. These are where the papers like this have been published recently or previously. Scope of the journal. So actually consider the instructions for authors, the previous issues, and whether your manuscript is similar content, methodology, and importance to those papers. Think about your audience. Who do you want to get this message to? And do think it beyond your own discipline, because sometimes a message can be wider than your own discipline, and you can be doing yourself a disservice by not going to, I suppose, a more broad-based journal. Speed of response. I mean, how long do you want to wait for an answer? So if there's a big backlog at this journal, what you want is someone to pretty quickly, whether it's in or out, so you can actually make changes and go on from there. And how long will it actually take for the journal to actually publish your publication? And I would think that something like 6 to 9 months was a reasonable expectation, a reasonable time frame to get your paper published in. If it's longer than that, I'd probably look somewhere else. Publication mode, can you pay for open access? Okay with online only. So think about those are the things when choosing a journal as well. And copyright. Check the fine print because it can be a bit tricky sometimes. Be careful what you're signing up for in copyright. So you usually actually assign the copyright to the journal and you give up your rights to publication. And sometimes your employer even has to pay access fees to access that. That's not so much a problem these days. Journals are turning around with the new UK and US rules around having to publish have open access within 6 or 12 months. Okay, so after you've chosen a journal, you can actually start thinking about writing the paper. And the place you start is a main message. You need to know this before you, again, put pen to paper, where you start. It should be, so your main message should be 20 words or fewer. And I'm going to use this expression a bit, I guess. It should be news. It's got to be something new. The editors, and you have to be able to say, look, this is new, it's different, and it adds on. So this is something, it's novel, it's different to what you've published before. Because if you're just publishing the same as what everybody else published, or trying to, it's actually not going to get over the line. And a manuscript has one main message only. Incredibly important, one main message. From there, you actually work up a working abstract. You've got your main message, you can write a title from that actually includes the main message, and then you write an abstract that covers 5 things, and this is 5 sentences, just 5 sentences. What you did, why you did it, what you found, implications for theory, and implications for practice. So what you're doing is actually you've already know what that paper is going to look like in the end, because you've got the answers to those questions. And do that up front. It's incredibly easier to write knowing what your main message is than randomly writing understand. Your main message is your start, but it's also your end point. So be coherent and logical. You need to clearly articulate the aims. So of course the aims are related to your main message. The introduction should always argue to the aims. And I do apologise if anybody thinks that's completely obvious, but I can trust me when I tell you that I have read many a paper where that is not happening. Methods should provide detail only for the data collection related to the aims. Again, this should be completely obvious. If you have an aim, I don't want to know about every other piece of information that you collected in regard to this study. All I want to know is what you collected in regard to this aim. And again, your results should only answer the aims. If you're not going to, a really good rule is, if you aren't going to mention a table, then don't put it in. If you aren't going to discuss that table in your discussion, then again, it may not be a worthwhile table to include. And you've got to think that journals don't want you to include a lot of tables. So usually you're restricted to 4 or 5 tables plus figures, so 4 or 5 tables and figures. So to make that choice, don't put it in there, you're not going to talk about it. And again, your discussion should pull out the salient findings to deliver one main message. And I personally find the discussion the most challenging part of the paper, because I always go, oh no, I've got to be clever now. This is where I've got to be scholarly. And again, can I share with you that I have read many discussions that are neither clever nor scholarly. And I have been known to say to papers because they haven't done that final bit of being a scholar, of writing a paper, bringing those results together and making it into something that is really interesting. And you see that it delivers one main message at the end. See, that's what you're actually working towards. The whole paper, from introduction to discussion, to have that one main message quite clearly. So if someone said to you, if someone after they read the paper, so what was that main message? They could go, it was this. There's no surprises in it. Okay, another really, really important step when you're writing a paper, and I think this one's sometimes forgotten by people as well, to get someone to read your draft and give feedback. Now that first quote is just an example of how sometimes people don't write that coherently. For some families, this is expressed, for example, where among other things, the play treats a relatively enduring pattern of intra-family relationships that does not easily adapt to change. And if you guys can interpret that for me, I'd be interested at the end. Thank you. Now, can I just say, especially important if your first language is not English. Dementia is not the biggest sanitary problem in the Western world, but I'm not quite certain what they meant there. They could have meant health problem, but we're only guessing. I have a particular associate editor who's one of our very, very precious members of our team, who is a real grammar Nazi. Yeah, but we're not all like that. But I suppose the message is that if you write coherently and you write easy to understand sentences, then when it gets reviewed, I mean, your reviewer goes, hey, I'm understanding all that. If they come up against a sentence and they go, what was that? It doesn't go well for the review. Okay, a little bit about writing style. And I have to say, I have to have a disclaimer on this, but this is very much about a scientific writing style. So take some of this. If you're more in the sociological sphere, perhaps it's more allowed that you can have more elaborate writing. But certainly scientific writing style, short words and short paragraphs. Always go for simple rather than complex. So if it looks like a complex sentence, make it into 2 or 3. Don't complicate your writing. Interestingly, stick to noun. What I mean by that is I actually don't want any adverbs or flowery language. I don't want any words like shocking, surprising, or anything like that. I don't want any of that sort of language. I don't want emotive language either. So for scientific writing, the sorts of papers I like and that I review positively are the ones that are very, very short and sharp. Now, this I actually think I should have this emblazoned on my forehead. I think follow the specific writing and formatting requirements of the journal you choose. Seems really obvious, but it's not. And I have been known to reject just on that. I look at it and go, that's not my format. I'm not even looking at that. Take it back and put it in the right format. And I think I'm not as fussy as some journals. So always use the right. Read the guidelines. Get out those author guidelines. Read them, because that's really important. And use the correct referencing style, no matter whether you like it or not. So here's a bit of a tip, and I think some people don't. When I tell some people this, they go, yeah. Order of writing, and this is the best way to write a paper. It's actually the easiest way to write a paper, because you start with the easy things first. Write your methods and results first, because you know what they are. You've done them. You should actually have a protocol beforehand, so you know what that method's going to be anyway. You know what your results are. Then you do your introduction. Then you do your discussion. And then you finalise that working abstract. And use a referencing software such as EndNote or RefMan, because it's your best friend in writing papers. I've been using it for quite a while, but I must say that I was resistant for a while. And when I was blessed and had someone else who was fixing out my references for me, So I did committed many EndNote crimes during that time, till I finally said, can I, look, just show me again how to use it? It's incredibly easy, but it's a really, really important thing. You don't have to worry about this references there. Don't use more words than you need to. Things like is reflective of, is indicative of. Just say there are. Try not to use that. There are some good measures about all that. Just cut that off the top, off the front, and get your word order right. And this is, look, honestly, we get some amusement from some of the sentences that we get to read. This one is actually really interesting. So this systematic review of 12 studies examined factors related to non-transportation of all by ambulance services to ED. Yes, it's good, isn't it? I think they meant that it's actually, it was looking at factors related to non-transportation by ambulance services. Actually, I'm not even going to have a go at that. I'll probably get it round wrong as well. But that's a bit of a tricky one. And you need, a comma might have helped with that. So never be afraid to put a comma in. And, sorry, I have to say it again, referencing. Make sure you get a journal style right. And actually get someone else to go through and check every reference for you. So let's use EndNote, but I think everybody who knows EndNote will know that sometimes when you generate a bibliography, there are some odd full stops, some spaces, some commas that don't belong there. Sometimes it misses a part of your reference. Always double check. It's best to go back to the EndNote and try to fix that up at EndNote, but certainly check it before you do anything else. Okay, this is what everyone wants to hear about. Is an editor to notice and like you. So, what does an editor ask when they see your submitted manuscript? The first thing they're going to ask, in fact, you might be lucky if it's an editor who asks this. It might in fact be a production assistant who asks this and just says go away. Is this in the journal scope? If it's not, it's an immediate rejection. Response to this, well, check if the journal has published this type of paper before, and if not, why not? There might be a really good reason. Pass it by an editor, see it's within scope before you submit it. That's always, and editors will get back to you about that. You will get the standard line that says, of course, you will need to go through the peer review process. We can't promise that it will be accepted. In your cover letter, mention past relevant publications from this journal and how this paper builds on them. And cite this journal. So what an editor asks, they ask, is this worth a review? And if they say no, it's an immediate rejection. But all they're going to do is a quick scan of your cover letter, your title, your abstract. If you're lucky, they might actually double check your methods. Now this is completely obvious in the abstract that they don't need to check your methods. So your response to this is, in the cover letter, explain why it's interesting to the journal readership. Write an abstract that actually sells the paper to editors, so that abstract is your selling point as well. And I sometimes I'm bamboozled by the fact that people do these really lackluster abstracts when in fact that's really all that your editors are looking at. In the vast majority of cases, that's all you've got time to look at is the abstract. And if you have to go to the methods, then you're already thinking, well, I should be able to get everything I need out of this abstract. So what you need is, what's your main message? Your main message needs to come through really clearly in that abstract. A bit of data, which is, I'm surprised I need to tell people that, but you need to provide a bit of data. You need to give enough, it needs to be a précis of your paper so that you give enough information that I can tell what's coming in that paper. And please don't have a mismatched abstract and paper, whatever you do. But what I've told you today, you're not going to do that anyway, because I've already told you how to avoid that. Make sure that your main message is new. So know your literature, and particularly this journal. So don't submit it if you don't know it's going to be worthy of peer review in that particular journal. So know that journal and what's already published. So what an editor asks is there a fatal flaw? And if there's a fatal flaw in your methodology, it's an immediate rejection. So what I mean by a fatal flaw, it depends on your basically your design. But so, for example, a treatment question answered by a small non-randomised study where there's too high a bias, or a review paper which hasn't got systematic research and critique. So your response to this is, well, follow best practice guidelines for your research as well as your writing. If you've got a lovely piece of work that does have some issues with it, in your cover letter, justify why it should be considered anyway. It may be that in the real world that was the data you could get sensibly, and you just need to argue that. If that fails, I'd actually suggest that you aim lower, so choose an appropriate journal. Choose a journal that has that can actually accept that sort of paper. Because and it is really difficult. I think when particularly with ageing researchers, we do sometimes work in settings that are, when you get at all, you're very grateful. We have some difficult settings, so it's about justifying why it's worthy anyway. An editor will ask, is it well written? And if it looks like a dog's breakfast, guys, then it's not going to get past this particular hurdle. And your response is actually, I hope you've listened to everything I've said so far, because that will actually get past this hurdle. As I said, follow your best practice guidelines for writing, and please watch your language and grammar. Again, always ask someone to review your paper, and ask someone to proof your paper as well. And someone to proof your paper, sometimes it's nice to have someone who's maybe an admin person, or someone who's not in your discipline. This doesn't make sense to those that aren't understanding exactly what they're reading. Does it make sense? Because it should actually be readable by and when an editor asks, why should I publish this? If they have no idea why, they'll go, well, why is this been submitted? Again, it's an immediate rejection. So your response is to use that cover letter to answer this question for the editor. And why you chose this audience. Again, mention those past publications and tell them why it's news. So this is my last slide. I don't know how long I've taken, but if I've gone true to past, I've probably talked way too quickly and not talked long enough, but that's okay. That there is one main message, and that one main message should be news. That the abstract needs to be solid. Sell that one main message and sell the manuscript to that first reviewer. Choose an appropriate journal, because I say be aspirational, aim high, but also be sensible in where you aim it to. Make sure it is within scope. Make sure it is going to be published, and make sure it does appeal to that audience. So be coherent in your writing. Follow guidelines, best practice and journal guidelines. Get really good feedback before submission, and the cover letter is a very, very useful tool. And can I just add something else? It is really helpful to have a look at the gender of the editor. Now, I'm not going to say that I will never be flippant enough to just dismiss someone because they call me dear sir, but every time it does rankle. I go, well, it's really obvious who the editor is, so maybe I can forgive international. Maybe they don't know, but it's actually quite nice to get a little dear Lynne or dear Professor Parkinson or that sort of, or even editor. Actually, dear editor is nice. So it's actually about just doing that little bit of homework about it. So your cover letter, use that as something that you, and I have to share with it. Recently, I was actually looking at a paper, and it's very recently, and I've gone, oh, I don't know about this one, I really don't know. And I opened up the cover letter and read it and went, okay, I'm going to give it a go. See, that works. So that's pretty much all I've got to say, but very happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Lynne. That was brilliant. So, Lynne, I'll ask the first question. In terms of that last comment that you made addressing the cover letter, I mean, one, you've made me think more about the cover letter than I've ever done before, so thank you for that. I normally just write dear editorial team or something along those lines. You would.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, look, I'm happy with dear editor. What I don't like is dear sir.
Yep, I can understand that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it makes a throwback to formality, but I actually think it's nice to have the name. I actually do. It shows that you've done your homework. And you know who you're writing to?
Okay.
There.
Cool. All right.
But don't try the Dear Lynne, Matthew, because it's not gonna wash, mate. I'll have to give it to someone else anyway.
Here, mate. Be you, I can see a hand up.
Yeah, hi, Matthew. It's Erika Borkoles from Victoria University, Footscray Park. I was really interested in, thank you very much for the brilliant talk, Lynne, and I was really interested in learning more about how you get people to actually do an authorship proper discussion and talk. Every time I try to do that, it's very hard to get everybody agreeing to how that is going to be managed within a large team.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's actually quite difficult, and I think that's why we start the discussion really early on. So when you've got your project team together, you start talking about it then. And I think a really important thing is that what you're actually not looking for an exclusive protocol, you're looking for something which is inclusive. So you're actually giving everybody the opportunity to be involved in every single paper you've got, but what you do is have some rules under it, saying, well, I'd like you to be involved in this paper, but this is what you need to do. So if you have a look at that Vancouver protocol, there's actually, you need to be involved in design, you need to be involved in interpretation, in writing, in review, you need to be involved in all those stages. So you can actually give people that and say, well, this is what you need to do to be an author. So I'd like to give you that opportunity up front. What sometimes happens is that people go off and write papers and don't give authors an opportunity. That's a problem. And sometimes they're missing having that input that actually, sometimes when it's interdisciplinary teams, they're missing that really good input. So I don't think it's easy, but I think the earlier you do it and the more often you do it, you'll become more confident at saying, well, this is the guidelines, I want you to read that. So what we think is you might have these 3 papers. We think that someone might lead this, someone might lead that. And the team, we've all got the opportunity to be involved, pretty much, unless it's like 20 people. I mean, you have to use some sense there. But it's about talking about it. And I think the more people do it, the more people will become used to doing that. It's so much better coping with that, I suppose, discordance now than when you've got the paper halfway through and you've got someone who's jumping up and down because they thought they should have been on it, but felt they got the opportunity to be involved.
Thank you.
Jan's got next to me.
I think it's slightly a little bit off field, but in terms of publishers, there's increasingly more interdisciplinary ones like the interdisciplinary social sciences, one that does have a peer review, but it's often incorporated as part of international conference. And I wondered if you knew much about those. And
I don't personally know a lot about those. Yeah, I don't personally. I shy away from anything that looks even slightly dodgy, I have to say. I would have to, and I don't know if they are. Being interdisciplinary, I'm not certain if that means that it shouldn't be peer reviewed. So the things you have to watch out for when you're looking at a journal, it must be peer reviewed. Otherwise, it's not a publication as far as your organisation is concerned. But otherwise, I mean, organisations like universities or whatever, or research centres have their own rules about you should have their own rules about where you need to submit papers. But if you miss on that one that it's not peer reviewed, you're actually wasting your time. But if it is peer reviewed, I mean, your next question is, does it have an impact factor? That's always best. Then you ask what the impact factor is. So that's the questions you need to ask about anywhere that you are publishing.
Lynne, do you use a journal comparison type when you're selecting where you want to target your articles? Do you have a?
I do. Yeah, I do. I actually start with a list of about 6, and I find out what is what their scope is. I find out everything about them and decide which one I would target first, and then I go through the list. It's a sad thing to admit, but yes, I go through the list as I get rejected. But you start with about 6 to start with, because then you choose and amongst your team. You say, look, I send around my team and say, look, these are the options, what do you think? And I'll often actually get a team member come back and say, well, then what about this one? So I always start with a few, and then I work down, or up. Yeah.
I'll pick up on one comment you just made in terms of getting rejected. I had a conversation with a very senior colleague a while ago who said he's written many papers that have got rejected, and he's taken the feedback of the editor and thought, yeah, no, they're right, and he hasn't then moved it on. So all these aborted papers that didn't go anywhere, you've always got to be prepared. Okay, take the feedback on, but reshape it and send it somewhere else. And as you say, if you go down the list, maybe, but still, always try and get everything published.
Yeah. And down the list may not be impact factor actually. The list is not necessarily about impact factor or anything. It's where you really like it, so but potentially by audience or whatever, and then you'll try some others. So it's not necessarily high that list. But yeah, you should always take that on board. And I didn't have time that whole reviewing, but can I encourage you to go along to the workshop in Adelaide, because they will talk something about that during that workshop. But yeah, you should always take that on board. And the thing about sometimes reviewers are wrong, and it's actually okay to come back to, very respectfully come back and say, thank you for that comment, but we didn't change that because of these reasons. So you don't have to, responding to a reviewer, they're not always right. Sometimes they've missed the point, but sometimes, okay, if they've missed the point, then you haven't said it clearly enough. So I would actually change it, make it less ambiguous, but also say, look, I haven't changed it, but I've clarified. But don't just go, no, I'm not going to do it. You must do that, and then move on.
Jen?
Lynne?
Sorry, no, I can't see a hand, but whoever just spoke, keep speaking.
Fiona McCock, University, School of Rural Health. Can you hear?
We can, Fiona.
Yep, sorry. Legislation, I'm just curious. I work in rural health, but my background is education, my research is, so that my focus is qualitative and does have an education focus. Is it worth submitting an article which has a very much a qualitative bent to a journal like yours?
Well, we actually publish a lot of qualitative research, so we'd actually be we'd comfortably accept that. I would be careful sometimes. I would really check what the past publications were in a journal before I did submit it, because some do not. They just don't review them kindly. But definitely, Australasian Journal on Ageing publishes a lot of qualitative work.
Okay, thank you.
You're next.
Yes, it was just a comment that I did get a paper published through the Australian Journal of Rural Health, and I have to say, it was daunting, but if you keep in mind, my gosh, I don't want to make a mistake in publishing this and everybody see it, I was really amazed how systematic and careful and helpful the whole review process was. It was just extraordinary. I couldn't believe people volunteer their time to, and as you say, if people don't understand it, I might understand it, but if they don't, so I want to know that.
Yeah.
It was a very positive experience. I just, first time ever, but I just couldn't believe the amount of help they will give you if you just follow their protocol and what they say, and really take on board that if they don't understand it, nobody else is going to, and you don't want to publish that.
Yeah. Now, my hat is off to our reviewers. We all volunteer work, so we actually we love those reviews that really take that time to be really systematic about reviewing. And we do actually rate our reviewers according to how well they do review papers. But it's all volunteer, so your reviewers are volunteer. You're a volunteer pretty much, reviewers are volunteer, editors are all volunteer. The only guy making any money out of this is the publishers. But for those reasons that I said at the front of that talk, you still need to do it. But it's really, the reviewers are really, really helpful. So if you see it that way, if you say this is positive for my paper, it's a nice frame rather than thin. Though I must say, if I get reviews that aren't very good, I will usually up and go, and I'll put them away, and I'll wait probably about a day or two, and I'll come back and I'll go, oh, that's not too bad, I can answer that, and then I'll find that it's just that it's review shock. the first time you open up, review shock. Oh, yeah. But just put it away, and you come back, and it sort of I don't know, it sort of dissipates a little. The reviews overnight, they get a bit better, and you come back and you can deal with it. But yeah, it's a good I think it's a good process. I think it's a process that works. Yeah.
Okay, more questions? Otherwise, I'll keep asking them. All right, I'll take the next one then, Lynne. You strongly recommend that people, once they're getting into the publishing world, go to the other side of the equation and become journal reviewers?
Absolutely, because you learn so much. Yeah, and we're actually, if you'd like to be a reviewer for AJA, then send me your email address. Send me a bit of a bio and send me some keywords and tell me why you want to be a reviewer, and we'll see about getting you on the database. We strongly encourage you. If you're feeling that you think, oh no, you couldn't be a reviewer, what I would say to you would be go to your supervisor and say, look, I'm interested in being a reviewer, but can you mentor me while I do my first couple so I know that I'm reviewing properly? It's a really good exercise. It's a scholarly exercise.
I have a question that came up specifically about your journal, Lynne. I'm on ResearchGate like most every other academic in the world.
Yeah.
Probably regret it like most every other academic in the world for all those annoying emails. Yeah, for a while saying that an article that I have referred to is allowable for self-archiving. It was an AJA article. And would I want to actually load it up on... Now, my understanding of that would be that self-archiving is within institutional repositories. So, in my case, within Monash, I think they're being bodgy, suggesting I put an AJA article PDF up on ResearchGate. What is the view of the...
That's Wiley's concern there. It's not the editor doesn't really. The editor would support all uploading as is legally allowable, because that means it's out there and citable. But that's actually a Wiley concern. It is changing though, so we are allowing. It depends, and we've recently changed it again. It's about this requirement for open access within 12 months that funding bodies are doing. So that requirement. So it could be that it's entirely legitimate. It depends on what it's sort of like. I think is a colour, yellow or green or whatever. But just be careful and double check what you've been told you can do. But I know it's changed recently. But as AJA editor, I would encourage it all. But the Wiley guys who make the money mightn't, and you don't want to get in trouble. So my answer is don't know. But I have put a few of mine up.
Okay. So I'll just put Lynne said I could.
Lynne said no.
What you've already referred to the workshop at the conference at the end of the year.
Yep.
I think one of the things so that people know the difference between what we've just done now and the workshop is they actually give you an opportunity to bring articles that are in progress along and get feedback, work up things a little bit.
Yeah, it's actually interactive. There's tasks within it and it's interactive. So and it's a whole different group of people. So I think the people who are running it are Buzzy Naganathan, Jane Sims and Yvonne Wells who are involved in that one. And they've been doing it for quite a few years now and developing it as they go. They certainly go into reviewing as well, writing, and when we talk about things like main messages, they actually want you to sit down and write that sort of thing. And they do, I'm not certain, they do upon occasion give you things to critique and give you feedback about that, or just, actually do. So it's very experiential and interactive. And it's longer. I only had half an hour. If I'd had 2 hours, I probably could have gotten into some of that, but I wasn't asking for 2 hours, Matthew. So.
No, you weren't going to get it. Eric.
Hi. Is anyone who is not member of ERA can actually just not go to the conference but enroll onto the 2 workshops you mentioned, Matthew?
No, unfortunately the workshops are for the conference participants because they're free workshops that are covered in the registration.
Okay, so they have to register for the conference.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how we justify.
It's a very cheap conference.
It is. It is.
Well, in our group, probably some people do aging research, others don't, but the methodology and writing is common, so they would be probably, especially the longitudinal data analysis, would be very attractive to quite a lot of people in our group.
All right, any further questions?
Yeah, I was just interested, just one more question. I don't know whether it's unique to Victoria University, but do people get recognition? You know, we are encouraged to publish with the least number of authors at this institute. Is that a common practice across all of you?
So what was that question again about number of authors?
Yeah, we are actually, you get more points in terms of research activity index at Victoria University if you publish less authors. Is that a common practice anywhere else?
It's certainly been mooted here at CQU. I'm actually not happy about that because it's very disciplinary. So some people have big multidisciplinary teams. Personally, I do. Always have big teams and multidisciplinary. Whereas some people, it's like sociology. It's quite common just to write one author. Health economics is always one author. So I think it's really so. Yeah, I think it's happening, but I think it's a real problem for people, and there's a lack of recognition that is disciplinary.
Yeah, thank you. That's comforting.
It is fairly widespread.
Right, okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for the great talk and discussion. See you all in 3 months, 2 months?
Yep. 2 months.
Yes, see you.
Bye. Send suggestions for your next conference topics for us so that we can make use of your knowledge and preferences. As I said, there's that publication survey out there. You'll that under the news link on the website, and start thinking about your conference abstracts for because we really want to have a good roll up in Adelaide. It looks like a great conference. It's very exciting. So, thank you so much, Lynne.